Let me reveal something wild. When a medieval city closed its gates and raised its banners, it felt like safety. Thick stone walls, towering battlements, moats, drawbridges, iron-bound doors. From the inside, a siege looked survivable, defensible, even hopeful. But in reality, the moment those gates slammed shut, the city was already dying. Not from swords and not from arrows, but from hunger, disease, fear. And the slow collapse of everything that made life human. Because medieval sieges didn't fail all at once, they rotted from the inside out. And almost every single one ended in disaster. Act 1. The illusion of safety. Medieval people believed in walls, and honestly, it made sense. Stone walls had protected cities for thousands of years. Rome had used them. Constantinople perfected them. A well-built wall could stop an army cold. Siege engines were expensive. Assaults were deadly. Charging a fortified city head-on was often suicide. So when danger came, people did the logical thing. They fled into the city. Farmers abandoned fields. Villagers poured through the gates with carts of grain, livestock, tools, children clinging to their legs. Bells rang, guards shouted, gates closed, chains dropped, silence followed. From the outside, it looked like resistance, and from the inside, it was overcrowding on a scale medieval cities were never designed to handle. A city meant for 10,000 people might suddenly contain 20,000. Or 30,000. Or more. Food stores that were meant to last months now had to feed double or triple the mouths. And here's the cruel truth medieval people didn't fully grasp. A siege wasn't about breaking walls, it was about waiting. Act 2. Starvation begins. The first enemy wasn't violence, it was math. Every city had granaries. But those stores were finite. Carefully rationed during peace. Already stretched thin by winter. Already vulnerable to spoilage, rats, damp air, and theft. Once a siege began, nothing came in. No fresh grain, no meat, no firewood, no clean water beyond what the city already had. And starvation doesn't announce itself dramatically, it creeps. At first people ate less, bread got thinner, meat disappeared. Then animals vanished. Horses first, too valuable to waste on feeding. Then pigs, then dogs, cats, birds. In prolonged sieges, historical records describe people eating leather belts, shoe soles boiled into gelatin, candle wax, tree bark scraped from inside the walls. This wasn't rare, it was expected. In some cities, grain was mixed with sawdust just to stretch it further. In others, bread was baked with grass, roots, or whatever could be pulverized into something resembling food. And the psychological toll was devastating. Because hunger doesn't just weaken the body, it erodes judgment. Act 3. Disease and filth. As food disappeared, something else multiplied. Waste. Medieval cities already struggled with sanitation in normal conditions. During a siege, it became catastrophic. Latrines overflowed, cesspits filled faster than they could be emptied. Clean water sources became contaminated, dead animals piled up, so did dead people. And now remember, the city is sealed, no airflow, no escape, no removal of waste. The air itself became dangerous. Medieval people believed disease came from bad smells, the infamous miasma theory. They were wrong about the cause, but terrifyingly right about the outcome. Dysentery, typhus, cholera-like illnesses, fever outbreaks, skin infections, parasites. Weak bodies from hunger couldn't fight infection. Minor wounds became fatal. Children died first, then the elderly, then anyone already sick. Entire neighborhoods would fall silent. And still, the siege continued. Act 4. The collapse of order. This is the part most history books sanitize, because sieges didn't just destroy bodies, they destroyed morality. As food vanished, prices exploded, the wealthy hoarded, the poor starved faster. Guards accepted bribes, black markets formed, theft became constant. In many sieges, city leaders executed hoarders publicly, not as punishment, but as a warning. Parents faced impossible choices. There are recorded accounts of families abandoning sick children because they could no longer feed them. of elderly people volunteering to be expelled from the city, knowing they would be killed immediately, just so others might survive a little longer. And then there's the part no one likes to talk about: cannibalism. It didn't happen everywhere, but it happened often enough to be documented across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Not frenzy, not madness, desperation. Act 5. Betrayal from within. Here's the brutal irony. Most medieval cities didn't fall because attackers broke in. They fell because someone opened the gate. As starvation worsened, loyalty fractured. Guards accepted bribes. City officials negotiated secretly. Rival factions sabotaged defenses. Sometimes the betrayal was strategic. Sometimes it was personal. Sometimes it was just exhaustion. There are siege accounts where defenders killed their own commanders and surrendered immediately afterward. Why? Because survival beats honor when death becomes inevitable. And attackers knew this. They didn't rush. They waited. Act 6. Surrender wasn't salvation. Even surrender didn't guarantee survival. Many attacking armies promised mercy and broke it. Others offered mercy only to nobles, or only to men, or only to those who could pay. Cities that resisted too long were often punished deliberately. Mass executions, enslavement, looting, forced displacement. Sometimes disease killed more people after surrender than during the siege itself. The city was hollowed out. ACT 7. Why sieges always failed. So why did medieval sieges almost always end in disaster? Because no medieval city was built to sustain isolation. Not logistically, not medically, not psychologically. Walls delayed death. They didn't prevent it. The real weapons of siege warfare were hunger, disease, fear, time, and time always won. When we imagine medieval sieges, we picture walls and warriors, but the true battlefield was invisible. In empty stomachs, in fouled water, in silent streets, in choices no human should ever have to make. Medieval cities didn't fall in flames, they collapsed inward, and that's why, in the end, almost every siege ended the same way. Not with victory, but with survival at any cost. And the tragedy is, this wasn't rare. It wasn't an exception, it was the default outcome of medieval siege warfare. Because once a city was surrounded, the outcome was no longer a question of if disaster would arrive, only how long it would take. The false hope of relief. In the early days of a siege, hope was a currency almost as valuable as food. People told themselves stories. Relief armies would come, allies would intervene. The enemy would grow bored, winter would force them away. And sometimes, very rarely, that hope was justified. But far more often, it was a lie people needed to survive one more day. Messengers were sent out through secret tunnels or disguised as refugees, begging for aid. Most never returned. Some were captured and paraded outside the walls as warnings. Others were simply ignored. Not out of cruelty, but because medieval politics moved slowly and armies were expensive. Even kings hesitated to commit, because a siege didn't just trap the defenders, it trapped anyone who tried to help them. So days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually hope itself became dangerous. Because hope delayed surrender, and delayed surrender meant punishment. When time became a weapon. This is where medieval siege warfare becomes psychologically terrifying. The attackers didn't need to attack. They built camps, dug trenches, constructed wooden forts around the city. They settled in, cooked meals, played dice, drank, slept, all within sight of the walls. They performed normalcy. Inside the city, life was unraveling. Outside, life continued. That contrast broke people. Defenders could see the enemy roasting meat while their own children starved. They could hear laughter drifting over the walls at night. They watched supplies arrive for the besiegers while their own stores vanished. This wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Time was the weapon, and the city was bleeding out slowly. The myth of heroic defense. Modern retellings love heroic last stands. And yes, courage existed. Desperation can produce astonishing bravery. But most medieval defenders weren't heroes. They were bakers, shoemakers, mothers, children, elderly men with rusted weapons, people who had never expected to fight at all. Militias were poorly trained. Morale collapsed quickly under hunger. Discipline disintegrated as survival instincts took over. In many sieges, defenders began firing arrows wildly just to feel like they were doing something. But courage doesn't create food, and wars don't cure disease. When religion failed. In medieval society, faith was central to everything, especially suffering. As conditions worsened, entire cities turned to prayer. Processions filled the streets, relics were displayed, bells rang day and night, people fasted, tragically accelerating their own starvation, believing God demanded sacrifice. Priests preached endurance. But as death spread, faith began to fracture. People asked dangerous questions. Why would God allow this? Why had the saints abandoned them? Why did prayer bring no relief? In some sieges, religious authority collapsed entirely. Priests were attacked, churches looted for food or valuables, sacred spaces became shelters, hospitals, and finally morgues. The spiritual glue that held medieval society together began to dissolve, and once that happened, order followed. Children and the unspeakable choices. This is one of the hardest realities to confront. Children suffered disproportionately during sieges. They required food constantly. They succumbed to disease faster. They cried, drawing attention to hiding places, hoarded supplies, and weakness. In some documented cases, parents made choices that modern readers find almost impossible to process. Sending children outside the walls, hoping attackers might spare them. Abandoning infants to preserve food for older siblings. Or the most horrifying decision of all, allowing children to die so others might live a little longer. These weren't acts of cruelty, they were acts of arithmetic, and they haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. Why cannibalism was a last, not first, resort. It's important to be precise here because sensationalism distorts reality. Cannibalism during sieges was not common in the early stages. It was not widespread in every siege, and it was not embraced. It occurred at the very end, when every other option was gone. Records describe people boiling leather first, then bones, then animal remains long after the animals were gone. Only when bodies accumulated faster than burial was possible did the unthinkable become thinkable. And even then, it was often hidden, secretive, shame-filled, not madness, survival. The moment a city realized it was lost. There was always a moment, not when the walls fell, but when the city knew, when grain stores were empty, when the sick outnumbered the healthy, when guards stopped showing up to posts, when leaders stopped speaking publicly. From that moment on, everything changed. People no longer planned for survival, they planned for what came next. Who would be enslaved? Who would be executed? Who might escape? Who would die quickly? And who would not? That realization was often more devastating than starvation itself. Attackers understood human limits. Siege warfare worked because it was built on an understanding of human endurance. Bodies can survive hunger longer than spirits can survive uncertainty. Attackers exploited that. They spread rumors into the city. They exaggerated their numbers. They promised mercy selectively. They executed prisoners just out of sight. So screams carried, but details didn't. This psychological warfare was deliberate and devastatingly effective. Why medieval technology couldn't save them. People often ask, why didn't medieval cities just prepare better? The answer is uncomfortable. They couldn't. No refrigeration, no antibiotics, no sanitation infrastructure. No mass food preservation beyond grain, no understanding of germs, no rapid communication. Even the best prepared city was only weeks away from catastrophe once sealed. Walls delayed death, they didn't prevent it. The aftermath. Surviving wasn't winning. Those who lived through sieges carried scars no armor could protect against. Cities that survived were depopulated, economies collapsed, trade vanished, skilled labor died off. Entire generations were lost, many cities never recovered. Survival wasn't victory, it was endurance. Why this matters today? It's easy to look back and think medieval people were simply primitive. They weren't. They were trapped by limits of knowledge, technology, and logistics, limits that modern society has only recently escaped. Sieges remind us that civilization is fragile, that systems matter, that when infrastructure fails, walls don't save you, people do. And sometimes, even that isn't enough. When medieval cities closed their gates, they believed they were choosing safety. But what they were really choosing was time to starve, time to suffer, time to break. And that's why medieval sieges almost always ended in disaster. Not because defenders were weak, but because no human society can survive isolation forever.